All right, students, let's begin. Session 6, our last of Care Team Training 2019. As you know, the very next slide. Oh, we'll tell you what we're doing today. Then, the very next slide. Home Communion and Life Transitions. So Dwight is going to help us in a minute with Home Communion after we take care of our opening matters, one of which is devotion. So, who hasn't done it? Anita's going to step up to the plate. Good for you.
Well, I come from a tradition of Al-Anon and currently Codependence Anonymous, so I have a few 12-step items here that I can share. And I'll just start with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And then there's an alternate to the Serenity Prayer, and that's, God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, courage to change the person I can, and wisdom to know that person is me. So in thinking about what we can change in ourselves, I'm thinking about attitude and our attitudes of compassion and thankfulness and gratitude. So I'd just like to start with a quote or paragraph by Charles Swindoll on attitude. The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than facts. It is more important than the past, than education, than money, than circumstances, than failures, than successes, than what other people think or say or do. It is more important than appearance, giftedness, or skill. It will make or break a company, a church, a home. The remarkable thing is we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we will embrace for that day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play the one string we have, and that is our attitude. I am convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. And so it is with you. We are in charge of our attitudes. And then a couple of other short readings. This one is from In the Moment. In this moment, I feel compassion. For a long time, my heart was small and blocked. I didn't feel compassion for others or myself. Then my higher power awakened in me the capacity to feel compassion. Now I feel no need to judge or fix others. I have no reason to feel pity or rush them through their pain. Compassion allows me to sit with a friend and listen. In such moments, I feel compassion for myself as well as for my friend. When I listen with my heart, I hear beyond mere words and into the heart of another human being. Compassion is an awe-inspiring gift from God. And then from another reading from Courage to Change, the degree of our humanity can be measured by our ability to, let me start again. The degree of our humanity can be measured by our ability to know another person's pain and joy. I can identify without needing to remove their pain. So just a short prayer to close. God, please give us gratitude and thanks for all the gifts you have given us, and help us enlarge our ability to feel compassion for ourselves and for others, and to be your hands and feet in the world to those we will visit, to our neighbors and friends in our world. Amen.
Amen. Homework review. So, we asked you last time under the presentation about self-care to wait just a few minutes when you got somewhere where there were people who weren't here to see if you were asked a particular question, which was, how are you, or how was your day, or something to that effect. So did that happen for you?
Yes.
So who asked you?
I asked a lady at church how she was. She had lost a friend a couple weeks
Yes.
before, and she just really appreciated it.
But did she reciprocate? Did
No,
she ask you?
didn't. It
Okay,
was
so this
kind
is
of a-
different. This is
yeah.
not you asking somebody how they are. This is somebody asking you.
Yeah.
So, did that happen to you? Did someone ask you?
Yeah.
Okay.
People are seemingly asking me a lot because my granddaughter passed away.
Oh,
And they know how hard.
yeah. So it's not just that you were here, but it's,
Right,
they're paying,
right.
they're
And
attentive
there's
to you
just
now.
so many people at church. And
Yeah.
I've had people take me over and pray with me.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Anybody else get asked how their day was last time? My wife asked me how was class today, so she knows that something special is going on. So as I mentioned last time, if you didn't get asked that question last Saturday when you left here and got to a place where people know you, then a good way to do it is to begin asking, just as you did. You ask others how they're doing, and hopefully it will be reciprocal at some point, and they'll start asking you, unprompted, how things are going for you. Self-care is just tremendously important. It is hard work, as Clark mentioned earlier. It is hard to, the training is easy compared to the kind of wear and tear that might come, the emotional draining that might occur with you as your care receivers go through hard times. You will feel their pain. Yes, Dwight.
I think oftentimes people say, how are you? Or we say, how are you? Or they say, how are you? And they're not really asking how you are. It's just a greeting. And so you have to try and work with that. Because I think lots of times, I have a son that the minute I talk about him, how are you? Well, it's a ritual, it's a routine. And I guess the question is, how do you turn that? How do you morph that into a real connection?
Sure.
Because it's not meant to really be a connection.
Yeah. Oftentimes I'll say, do you really want to know? And, you know, they might say nothing to that, in which case it was just a greeting. Or they might say, sure, I do really want to know. But a point I've always made is never ask that question of anybody unless you have time to listen to their answer. Because it might be longer than just a little greeting. They might have a whole story to tell. So, all right, good. I hope you read the article that helped prepare you for today. Is shadowing good? We've all accomplished the shadowing experiences we need to. As a reminder, you can send those to me, the reports by mail, whoever took you on a visit. They can mail them to me, or they can be scanned and emailed to me. I'll give you an email address. I'll mention just now that the email address that's on my business card, if any of you picked it up, is incorrect. There used to be just one Mark that works here at this church, so I had that address, but now another has come to work here. So on, I think, one of the last slides today, it'll tell you what the correct email address is. Devotions we did. And then a Bible, something for devotional materials. If you didn't do that, there's Bibles around the room that you can use when Dwight begins his presentation. So here we go, Eucharistic ministry. This is going to be Dwight's part of the program today. I invite you to go to tab 6. There you will find some communion liturgies. You can use these. You can come up with something else. There are, I think, 3 in your notebook, and you might want to just look through those as Dwight does his presentation. This is what at least one of them looks like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dwight.
Well, I think most of you know I'm Dwight Haberman. I'm a retired United Methodist pastor. I have the great privilege of being here at Hennepin. And I have the great privilege of, I don't like the word leadership. I guess the word I use is guiding a service here at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning of communion every week, which I think is important, and you'll discover as we go along how important I think the communion is for us. I'm also a resourcer, and as Mark knows, I don't do a very good job at some of it. So I want to pass these things out, but let me, you can just pass them around. This you have to look at up in the corner and read the numbers. I don't know how to work copy machines, so all the pages are here, but they're kind of out of order. So we're going to start that, and on the inside is the insert, which we'll use at some point along the line. So just pass those around. Some of you may know of John O'Donohue, who was tragically died here some years ago, an Irish poet, mystic, and I just rely so heavily on his insight and so forth. So this is one of his, there's 2 sides to it. one of his poems about on the death of the beloved, and I think beloved simply means somebody who's important to you. And he's a great believer, and the Irish kind of do that, the blessing, may the road rise. And so I have a great, well, my image is the importance of the word may. The minute the word may is out there, then that's kind of suggesting that you are offering them something. May the road rise to meet you.
One more. One more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Of all of them?
No, just this.
Oh, that one, okay,
Got it.
thank you.
Yep.
So he's a great one on blessing. So then this envelope is a blessing that came out of a set that he produced, and on the inside is a reproduction that I made of his call for blessings. So share that with you. Two more. These are just some other prayers that you might fronts and backs on this one, and well, I guess the fronts and backs on both. Sometimes I don't know that you use these for rote, but I think sometimes just in reading these and then praying these yourself, you get some kind of a sense of what a prayer can be like. I think it's very difficult to sometimes initiate prayer with people who are dying. O'Donohue talks about the fact that he was a priest for many years, that as people came near death, there was a certain, if they were aware that they were dying, there was a certain peaceableness that came over them. They finally realized, hey, I can't fight this anymore. I can't do anything anymore. I'm just on the way. And then sometimes this opens them up to be listening. And so, in any event, I just share those materials for what they're worth. Wanted to share a little bit of background. Kind of tells you where my heart and spirit is. Scripture says we're to love the Lord our God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. Do you notice we're intellectual people? Did you see where mind was? Heart, soul, mind. So that suggests to me, and maybe I just like it, so I'll say that there was some reason for that, but all of the Gospels have the same order, that we begin with the heart. We begin with the soul. We don't begin with answers. We don't get into the intellectual. What we do as caregivers, and what we share is our heart and our soul. And part of my journey these days is to try and understand what my soul is and how I nurture that soul. And for O'Donohue, that was very, very basic. Heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I'd like to set the communion in a little larger setting. I grew up in a world in which when I addressed God, I was talking to it was more a person, I guess, because I had to talk to a person. And that person, or that God, I think, I didn't know anything differently, and I don't think it was a problem, but God was kind of related to the earth. But we live in a day, and I have to give you my theology so that it kind of sets the stage for things. We now live in the world in which we know that the universe, and I use the word know because I think it's pretty well documented, that the universe began with the Big Bang. At some point in history, the Creator, the God we know, was involved in creating this universe that we're still learning about, still out there. But the implication of that is, for me, and maybe it'll help you to get some sense of who I am and where we're going. What that means is we're all stardust. Every molecule, every atom in this universe binds us together because we're all the same stuff. That fireplace is alive with stardust. We're alive with stardust. Comment this morning, a woman came in from another church for a meeting. Our flag, we believe it's a church for all here at Hennepin. Why? Because every human being is alike. We're made of the same stuff. I can't say, well, that person's somehow really different from me, because we're all the same stuff. And this leads me, I guess, in some sense, to presence. There is a presence. God isn't this God that, well, J.B. Phillips. Anybody here old enough to remember J.B. Phillips in the 40s, 40 years ago? He wrote a book, Your God is Too Small. And for me, I grew up with a God that was too small. I didn't know anything else, but now I know, as I look at the universe and experience the universe, that that God was too small. The God that I need to try and relate to and invite into my life is the God of the universe. Anything less than that is a God that's too small. We just live in a day and an age when we understand that what we call God is spirit, and that spirit fills the universe. Not a God out there, but a God who comes to us, and there's kind of a contradiction here. I have to work with it, and I'm working with it. God is in everything. So how is it that God is in bread and wine? If God is in everything, does that make communion any different from anything else? And my sense is, as I read the scriptures, that Jesus took bread. He blessed it, said, this is my body. Not going to debate all the theology, but he used the word blood. And so there's something that makes communion, the presence of Jesus Christ and the Spirit of God. There's something special about how that comes to us in bread as in wine. One of my lines these days is about specialness. Yeah, lots of things are special, but some things are more special than others. There's a kind of a gradation. And so there's a sense in which everything is special, everything is filled with the Spirit of God. But in Jesus we have been given something which kind of transcends and has a specialness to it, in which we meet God in a very special way. It's Mark said when the minute he saw it, he said, well, you can't read it because this is very dark, and on the insert that you have in your materials it's very dark. But I'll read it now and we'll close with it. Every single hour since the middle of the 1st century, somewhere in our world, people have taken bread and broken it, calling it the body of Christ, and have given it to one another as they remember Christ. They have used it roughly the same words, told the same story in hundreds of languages, and when we break the bread, we join a company of people that extends around the entire world, as well as back in history, and forward into the future, and upward into eternity. Even if we repeat it 1,000,000 times, we never fully comprehend its meaning and impact. It is a mystery. And those of you who know the study we did here at Hennepin some time back, Bishop Shinazi, I can't even pronounce it, has written that, and he is the author of the 4 pages that I gave you. And so, yes, God is in everything. But this has been given to us in a very special way, and I think sometimes we in the church, I have to be careful here. I think I don't know if it's trivialized. It's my prejudice. But we in this church and in most churches, communion gets kind of, can I say this, Mark? it kind of gets plugged into something else that already exists. Sacred Journey here, certain Sunday of the month, we kind of plug in communion, and it is communion. But there are times when I think, and that's why I like our 8 o'clock service here, that's all we do. We come here and we remember and we know that in this bread, in this wine, God is present with us. And into the words, and through what happens, we celebrate that very special quality that comes in bread and wine. Our Roman Catholic friends have to have transubstantiation to have that happen. How is God present? Well, because the priest blesses it. So once the priest, this thing that was just bread and wine, now all of a sudden it's Jesus present with us because the priest has done that. My sense is that it is the body and blood. This is God's present with us simply because God is present with us. It doesn't take anything special. We use special words because that's a part of our tradition. But God is already present in those particular elements. But I think in the church we've sometimes made a kind of a remembrance. I have a son, lives in another city, was a part of a big mega church. And God bless him, I guess it worked for them, it didn't work for me. There were 1,000 people there. And they passed the bread down, they passed the wine down, and I don't know, something was missing for me. That's why I need sometimes smaller groups, quiet, some sense that this just isn't routine. And I think when we go to visit with people, we're not bringing them something that is routine. That we do this because it's routine. We do this because we've been asked to do it. We come and we share these gifts because they are special. And we take the time, we do it slowly, we do it with understanding and with love and compassion. And we're simply giving them the opportunity to share in this experience. And I think I was talking to Clark about this. Music therapists testify. They go into the nursing home, they got their guitar and they're playing away, or they're playing the record, Frank Sinatra. Man, everybody just, oh man, live. And they, or maybe it's way back in, I'll say way back in the 1920s and 30s. That's what way back really means, friends. And people just perk up because there's a connection there. And
I can really reinforce that because at the holidays I go play Christmas carols, religious ones, for a home near my house, and people that don't speak sing those songs. That's an absolute connection.
Yeah. And I'm not sure whether it's the importance or lack of importance that we sometimes have in the institutionalization of the communion, and I'm not sure that it is an automatic way of saying the same thing happens with communion. But my sense is that if you share with the people that you're coming and visiting and have that relationship with, that even if they haven't connected it, to take bread and wine connects them with their whole history in the church. And maybe they remember, and it reminds me, I was going to ask you before we started what and we'll still do that, your memories of the church, or what it is that communion means to you. But I think that we have the precious privilege, they can watch, I don't know if they watch the podcast or whatever, or get the bulletin, but this gives them something tangible that they can touch, that can connect them with many, many years of worship in the life of the church. And I think that's a very precious gift that we offer. So I think the communion when we go is a chance to really touch deeply, not necessarily the mind, but the heart and the soul of people with the bread and the wine. And my sense is that not only are we talking about what it means for those with whom we give care, but my sense is that probably as importantly, it's what it means for you. When you go there, when you have the opportunity to take these elements and give it to, my sense is that it's something that touches you. And so as you're there, you're not just doing something for them, you're doing something for the both of you. And that you bring that, somehow that love together. So I guess what I'm basically trying to do is to say there's a presence in this world that makes the difference in people's lives, and whether they're cognizant anymore, who knows, but that there are opportunities in the sacrament to, first of all, to share with them, whether they're knowing it or not. We are sharing the love of God. Here on Sunday we use the word the bread of life and the cup of hope, and I don't care how you want to use it, but we are, it's not just a routine. There's something of the soul, there's something of the heart that gets transferred and committed to people when we share in the communion, and it's very precious. It's still a mystery. That's the craziness, well, not crazy. That's the interesting part of this. It's very simple, it's very plain, and yet it's a mystery. And we take that mystery and we share it with people. And it connects people to their God, to their past, and with you. And make sure. As you get older, you don't remember things. You have to kind of go back and make sure you've covered what you need to cover. Well, I've got here, we can convey, without even the theory, to these people who may be in a more isolated setting that they are immersed in. See, I think the soul, the heart talks about being immersed, being embraced, being held by the will and the love of God, who says, I am with you. It's a mystery. I've had to struggle with that. Maybe it's because of my own self-image, that the Spirit of God could live, and God's power lives in me, not around me, but in me. And so, in case you still wonder about that, for this reason, says Paul to the Ephesians, I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth takes its name. I pray that, according to the riches of his glory, he may grant you that you may be strengthened in your inner being, you and those who you are visiting. Strengthened in your inner being with power through his Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, and that you, being rooted and grounded in love, I pray that you may have the power to comprehend or experience with all the saints what is the breadth, the length, the height, and the depth, and to know the love of God which surpasses knowledge, so that you may be, did you finish up the sentence? That you may be filled with all the fullness of God. And that's what we seek to bring to people, that they know that they are, hopefully in some sense, even though they're maybe not totally cognizant, that they have some sense that they are, and it's always life, but the bread and the wine can remind them that they are filled with all the fullness of God.
Do I,
Yes,
what's the
Ephesians 3:14 to 19.
Okay.
See, I had to struggle with that. I went through a long time when I couldn't believe that I was good enough for God to live in me, or God's Spirit could dwell in me. But that, how many times have we read that through our whole life, heard that? But do we believe that, and do we live as though that is true? Could you take your sidebar, try and find that? It's in the book. It's in the booklet type in this thing. It's an insert, and Mark pointed out when he saw it that it's a little murky up at the first 2 or 3 lines. But let's read that together. Do we all have that? Let's read that together. Every single hour since the middle of the first century, somewhere in our world, people have taken bread and broken it, calling it the body of Christ, and have given to one another to remember Christ. They have used roughly the same words, told the same story in hundreds of languages. When we break the bread, we join a company of people that extends around the entire world, as well as back in history and forward into the future and upward into eternity. If we repeat it 1,000,000 times, we never will fully comprehend its meaning and its impact. It is a mystery. Lo, I tell you a mystery. Any of you, and I should have invited you to do that at the beginning. Do we have a couple of minutes, Mark, for them just to kind of share kind of what's been your experience when you think of communion? What does it mean? I wanted it to be what it means to you, not what I just told you. But what is it that you bring when you come to, in your memory and in your being, that you bring to people when you come, out of your experience?
Well, Dwight, I think I agree with you. It's a connection that's historic. In my little Methodist church, they kind of gave it the way you described, with the kind of the wine and the bread passing among the pews. And that wasn't as much of a connection, but I can remember almost one of my first visits here at Hennepin. One of the ministers gave me my communion elements, and he just said, "Take this and know that God loves you." And out of all the ways I've heard the story, in addition to the big story, I love that, and I've always held on to that. So on those days when I get to serve it, this is the method I use, because I think that's the powerful thing to remember in my mind. And it connects back forever. We always try to come on Communion Sunday. And when I can't make that, I try to go have it some other way. It's really an important ritual to my family.
You do know that historically, lots of times in a lot of churches, I don't know, Mark, about the Lutheran church, people stayed away from church on Communion Sunday. I'm serious. They thought they weren't worthy, or there was some other reason, but it was just the other way. Okay, thank you.
And I love it that everyone can have it here.
Yep.
I used to think as communion of talking to God when I was there and telling him, "Forgive me, I did that," and then, but now I go and I say, "Fill me up, Lord. Fill me up." And honestly, I get the chills right now, but I go away and I just feel revived or different. So that's been a real awakening to me.
Okay.
I'm kind of like Laura. Years ago I used to go, and it was more of a ritual that you pick up when you're a kid, and you just go and you sit through it, and you don't really think about too much, or maybe you confess a few sins and ask for forgiveness. But 4 or 5 years ago I started praying when they were giving communion, and I visualized this like golden cord between me and Christ, and when I got that blood and body of Christ, it was
someone that was, sort of above everybody else, so to speak. And then when I came to Hennepin, I had to think about it at first, but I thought, wow, this is really neat that people that serve communion can be children, can be parent and child, it can be anyone. It doesn't have to be somebody that's just set aside to do this, but it made it more inclusive and I think meaningful to me that it's sharing God's love with everybody, and anybody can do that. It doesn't have to be certain people.
Thank you. What we do on Sunday morning here, we have a small group, but I give them the bread. Then I give the cup to the first person, and this is probably the way it would happen in the early church. The cup gets passed down from layperson to layperson. I mean, because I think it is something that we give to each other. And as a personal aside, when my time comes to depart this world, I have 4 boys. There are going to be 2 stations of 2. We're going to have communion at my service. I mean, I can't. You don't do it but I have to have communion at my service. That's just who I am. And my kids will, and two of them are ordained, by the way, but they will share the gifts.
Well, we hope that service is far, far away. Thank you, Dwight.
Well, thank you.
We're going to do communion now in a manner such as you might experience it when you bring communion around to your care receivers. We have some communion kits that will be available to you. Some of our caregivers rather, just keep them. We have enough for everybody. So here at Hennepin, at any rate, we have enough for everyone, and you bring them back to church to have them consecrated again when you run out of bread and juice, wafers and juice.
How long does the bread last?
Really long time.
Okay.
Yeah, it's unleavened bread. It's unleavened bread. They're the little wafers, yeah, and they're in sealed containers. So yeah, I've never had to discard any for purposes other than they got a little dirty. I
Do we
think.
ask them before we go to, like when you're making arrangements to visit them, if they're gonna want communion, or do we bring it in?
My practice would be I just bring it,
Bring it,
and then if it comes up in the context of the visit, then you can be ready.
Okay.
Yeah, I visited a fellow, I may have mentioned this in another session, a couple of weeks ago, and the first thing he said after he said hello is, "Did you bring the Lord's Supper?" And so some people, he was a Lutheran fellow, they sort of expect it. Methodists sometimes less so, but as our caregivers and care receivers get to know each other more and more, it's becoming more common. Because they can't get here for communion, and oftentimes the pastor can't get around very often.
Can you just offer it, or say, I do have it with me? Or-
Yeah, you
Okay.
just say, I have communion, would you like to have communion today? And then you see what they say. If they say no, then it's no. Yeah. So what Dwight's going to do now is do that part of the communion service that we call consecration, where the pastor blesses the bread and the wine or the juice. And when this happens here at church, we have these kits up on the altar, so they are blessed at the time that the pastor does communion for the people. And then these kits become what we call reserved sacrament. They're already blessed. And if you don't keep one yourself, then they're kept in my office here at this church, and most pastors have a kit or two in their office. So if you're from a different congregation, you just have to find out what your resources are. These are not terribly expensive. They're easy to get, so you could just ask your pastor about that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dwight, who's going to do that part of the service where the elements are blessed, and then I'll explain what comes next.
Yeah, my approach is that I like to have some kind of sense that people say, yeah, this is kind of how we did it. So there's kind of a form that I like to follow. But the wording, I think, is something that needs to be a part of their life. And so let me just try to share one option as we begin. I think you're aware generally we kind of go, the Lord be with you and also with you. And it's right to give our thanks and praise. It is right, for you made us. Before us you made the world in which we live. You created and filled the universe with beauty and power and love. We are grateful for your creation, known and beyond our view. We praise you, knowing that your Spirit fills the universe. We praise you for the wonder of your gift of love, for coming to us, to earth, and entering our time in Jesus. For his life which informs our living, for his compassion which changes our hearts, for his living a life that is an example of what your love looks like. Being a servant, preaching good news to the poor and the powerless, healing the sick, feeding the hungry. For his clear speaking which contradicts so much of the culture that surrounds us today. For broken bread and wine, shared that foreshadowed his love for us as expressed on his death on the cross. And then quite often there are responses. And now, gracious God, you have been faithful to us, and so we seek to be faithful to Jesus. For he promised to be with those who meet in his name. He promised to hear the prayers of his faithful people. He said that in the communion of bread and wine, that he would be present with us and in us. as we remember him. And so he was among friends, and he gathered around the table. He took bread, having blessed it, he broke the bread, gave it to his disciples, and said, "This is my body, which is given for you." In the same way, he took the cup, and having given thanks for it, he poured it out, gave the cup to his disciples, said, "This cup is the new relationship that God has made possible because of my death. Take it, all of you, to remember me." And so we believe that he who lived and died and rose again will meet us here. And again, sometimes you can have them involved in a prayer if they so choose. And so we thank you, God, for your presence with us and in us as we gather at the table, your presence in these gifts of bread and wine. And now, as we share these gifts of bread and wine, we know that you bring to us the possibilities of life and hope and love. We pray that we may never cease to be open to experience your promise in ourselves and in others. So may these gifts be for us in Christ, the bread of life, the cup of hope, that we may be one with each other and one in ministry to the world, as we share our life and our hope with the world. So we take this bread and we share this cup. And these Christ comes to us with the love of God. Amen.
So, these elements are now blessed by an ordained pastor. Sometimes people will come to my office asking for a communion kit of blessed sacrament, and there's no service, there's no nothing, so I'll just do it really fast. And the important words are, in the night in which he was betrayed, our Lord Jesus took bread. That's the important language that pastors use to bless the elements. And you repeat those in the service, I think in all three of its formats. You read, "When our congregation gathered for worship, the pastor said," in the night in which Jesus was betrayed. So they hear those familiar words that Dwight was talking about. And it brings them right back to the sanctuary, the pastor, even when they're very young people. So what we're going to do now is you're going to deliver communion to your care receiver, who will be someone sitting by you this morning. So you're going to play the role of a caregiver or a care receiver. And we have enough people and enough kits to have two people do this each. If Dwight will go, maybe with Kathy or one of you anyway, pair up. It doesn't matter. You need to decide who's going to be the caregiver and who's going to be the care receiver. Whoever's going to be the caregiver, come and get one of these kits. We're going to open this bottle of juice, which is now blessed, and you're going to very carefully pour it from this bottle into the little bottle that's in the kit, because that's what you'll bring with you to the homes you go to see. So that's the first order of business, is decide who's going to be the caregiver, who's the care receiver. Whoever's a caregiver, come and get a kit. In it, you'll find there is a little tin with wafers in it. And then pick the service that you're going to use out of the notebook. As I mentioned, there are 3. Some are a little longer than others, but you can do whichever one you want. Some call for responses from the person that you're visiting, and that may not be possible. If the person you're visiting has sort of a limited attention span, you might want to abbreviate it. And just make sure that those important words are there, which are, "When our congregation gathered for worship, the pastor said." And then oftentimes the Lord's Prayer will come after that. So that's your assignment, is to pair up, and then whoever's going to be the caregiver, come get a communion kit and
I'd like to be a receiver.
give it a go. And I'd like Dwight to be a receiver,
Yes,
too.
I want to be a receiver.
Maybe it does a different thing.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
For thine is the
Kingdom
kingdom
and
and
the
the
power
power and the glory.
Okay, let's start it. It is Jesus, God incarnate, the risen Christ, who joins us together as believers, loving what he loved, living what he taught.
I'm nervous, I've not done this before.
And this body of Christ, Jesus, gives promises and the price he paid for who he was, what he said, and what he did. In our congregation gathered for worship, the pastor said, on the night before Jesus died, he took a loaf of bread, gave thanks, broke it, and said, take it.
Okay, if I could have your attention, again, please. So we'll wrap up our time of talking about delivering communion to our care receivers. What do you do if there are leftover elements? That just came up. So this is reserved sacrament now. This is blessed, as is the wine that might still be in the little glass jars in your communion kits. That doesn't keep very well. If you're going to see more than one person, you should be sure to bring enough for everybody that you're going to go see on your round of visits. For example, if you go to a nursing home and you're going to see 2, 3, 4 people. So make sure that you have enough. It just has to be a little taste. Another option, by the way, if people have trouble receiving communion, you can do intinction, where we dip the wafer into the wine. That's the word for that. And if they have trouble swallowing, what I've done sometimes is just touch the wafer to their lips, and then they don't eat it. Just try to get close. I've had to bring communion to people pre-surgically, and the anesthesiology department gets a little upset if they eat anything, and so just touching it to their lips or their tongue is enough. And then take it aside and do what it says here, which is if there are leftover elements, you put them in the ground. So in the sacristies of a lot of churches where they do communion cleanup, there's a sink, and it doesn't drain into the sewer system, it drains into the ground. It's just a pipe that goes straight down into the earth, and it's a special sink just for that. So what I would do is, if I'm on the way out of a nursing home, I'll just flip the wafer into the bushes and pour the wine there too. Or the grape juice. So it's an empty cup. And then I would, if you're going to be a purist about it, then it's the same story for the cup. You should maybe go to a hose and rinse out the little plastic cup so the water goes into the ground with a little bit of wine in it, and then just throw that plastic cup away. If there's a wafer that's been touched or isn't clean anymore for some reason, just toss it into the bushes. We've got plenty. We have plenty. When your kit is empty, then bring it back to the church, restock it. Have a bottle of juice like this or wine. Wine keeps longer, particularly something like Mogen David or is commonly used, which, by the way, is okay for Methodists. If you read the Book of Discipline, you'll find out that wine is okay, even though most churches don't use it. Most Methodist churches don't. So you might want to get a little jug of juice like this, or I have some in my office for the Hennepin visitors, so you're just ready to go. Or you can consume it, which, you probably, if you've ever been to a Roman Catholic Mass, you've seen the priest just gulps down the cup and then wipes it out, because it's meant to be all consumed. So toss it in the ground or just consume it. And I would say that would be true for this. So this now is blessed sacrament, and it would probably be a fine idea if one of us just drank this before we left. Otherwise, I'm just going to pour it outside when we're done.
Now, I can tell you, we were at Gay Pride March with Bruce Robbins, and we were giving communion out on the float.
Oh.
And at the end, he said we had to eat it all the leftovers.
Yeah.
So we had a little eat the bread and drink the grape juice.
Well,
party.
and I, for one, particularly when they use a real loaf of bread, I just love, because it's usually really good bread. You can always find somebody that'll want to eat it. So that's what you do with the leftovers. The wafers, as long as they haven't been touched or used too much, can certainly be used again.
Are these wafers gluten-free?
No, they're not gluten-free. So you can get gluten-free wafers. That's not this. They're special. So you should talk to your whoever it is that's in charge of communion at your church or who does worship. It might be one of the pastors would have some, but they look a little different, the gluten-free ones. So, how'd that go? How'd you feel about
It's
it?
very intimate when it's smaller.
Yep.
Very
It is.
intimate.
It is very
Like a
intimate.
bond.
I think so. Yeah, and you can imagine doing that in the context of visiting somebody in their home or a nursing home. It'd be quite touching, I think. Okay, it's time for the very last talk on the very last session, which has to do with life transitions. There are lots of transitions. When we're born, it's a transition. When we are baptized, it's a transition. When we're confirmed, it's a transition. When we get married, it's a transition. When we become ill, there are transitions. When we die, it's a transition. So we're changing from one state to another, and the church has ceremonies and services that they offer for all of those things. The particular one we're going to think about right now is when people move from life to death. As we've mentioned all along, if you are a caregiver and if your care receiver is older, odds are you're going to live to see them die. And how you spend time with them and their families is something that we have to think about before that moment arrives, because you take on a special role in a way, and you might be more present with them than even the pastors of the church are. So to think about that, we have to deal with our own deaths. I always have said it's best to think about our own experiences of loss and death before we try to help anybody else, and come to terms with those things that we carry with us, those losses that we carry with us. So we're going to begin with a little exercise. I'm going to invite you to write down 4 things. The first one, what is your earliest recollection of a death that affected you? Earliest recollection. So how young were you, and what was the thing that died? Who or what was the thing that died? Second, the most recent death that affected you. Third is your saddest death memory. And fourth, is anyone close to you likely to die within the next days, weeks, or months? Those 4 answers, please. Just jot it down somewhere on your notebook. I'll give you my answers, and then I'll see if any of you would like to share an answer. Earliest death recollection is probably my cat, Kiki, who died when I was out of town one weekend. Turns out, actually, well, the story was Kiki ate a bird and died. And many years later, Kiki ate a bird and got taken to the vet because my parents were a little tired of her eating birds. So my mother finally fessed up to putting her down. But I was just a very little guy, and she wasn't a very good cat. So it was not a loss for my parents, to say the least, but it was a little tough on me. Most recent death that affected me, most likely my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, who died about a year ago. Saddest, probably my mother, which was 10 years ago, actually. And I think that because it has affected me the most over time. I've missed her the most. I was pretty young when my dad died. I missed having a dad around, but the loss of Mom was pretty rugged. Anyone close to you likely to die in the next few days or weeks? Clark's mother-in-law is quite near death. That's why he had to leave. And I know her and have been visiting her, so that we're expecting that death to come soon. Anybody else have answers to these questions? Yeah.
My earliest recollection, when I was in 2nd grade, I had a classmate that died in a bicycle accident. Most recent was my ex-father-in-law. Saddest memory, my daughter's friend was 8 years old and died in a bike ride again. Yeah. And then no one near me is going to die in the near future.
Good, thanks. Anybody else? Yeah.
I remember when I was 5 years old having to go to Iowa for a funeral of my great uncle who had been murdered on his way home from cashing his check. Had been robbed.
Oof.
And I didn't understand any of that at the time, but yeah, I remember that everybody was crying, and I remember seeing the body and all that at the church, and yeah. And the most recent was my husband's aunt, who was 98 years old, passed away last May, a couple months before her 99th birthday. And the one that is the saddest was my mother. She passed from suicide, and it has taken most of my life since then to deal with that, and you just never really get over that, I don't think. And I don't have anyone that's not going to die soon that I'm aware of.
Okay. Anyone else care to? Yeah, Karen.
I had a cousin, a male cousin that died. He was a year older than I was, and I was in either 9th or 10th grade. So I had taken a gun out of his cubby hole. He was carrying a gun, surprising, and went out there was a rabbit. He stopped and was going to shoot this rabbit. And he tripped and it ended up in a death. One of my best high school friends just died last November, Carol. And we went to see her about a couple weeks before she died. And, you know, she was very comfortable with going. She said, I'm not afraid. So, my parents, my mother, I miss the most. Although my parents were married for 70 years, and I know when my dad passed, she would keep asking me, you know, she was kind of losing her memory, and she kept asking me, now how did Dad and I meet again? So she liked to hear that story again and again. I'm not aware of anyone who's died, no.
Okay, anybody else have a story?
My recent one, I'm sure I've shared it before, was my granddaughter. And that has been the hardest for me because we were so close. I mean, we were soul sisters, so to speak. She was my first. She spent more time with me than any other family member. We just had this deep love. And someone said to me, I think it was Cindy Foster, why is the grief so deep and hard? She said, when you love deeply, you grieve deeply, and that just really touched. So now I know and understand, like, you know, the stages that I've been going through with grief. And then I wonder, because when my mother and father both passed, it wasn't the same. You know, and I think maybe the age thing, you're expecting it, it's still not easy, it's still not okay, but that's my stuff.
Anybody close to you likely to die anytime soon?
Not
no?
right now.
My earliest recollection was a pet bird. I was pretty young. And most recent was actually a significant other of a number of years of mine, but I had ended that relationship. And even though I had, he just died in March, so it was still really touching and kind of hard. And saddest is my older brother, who was killed in a work accident in '79, and he was 34, and it was a real tragic, horrible accident. And you know, it affected my parents hard, and obviously, and you know, it was just tough to lose him so young. So, and nobody that I know of is lost.
Okay. When it comes to helping others deal with death as it's coming to them, either the person or the people around them, it's good that you remember the things we've just said to one another, particularly the saddest death, and how that's affected you over the years, or months, or weeks. You don't need to talk about it, but remember what it felt like and feels like, because these people are feeling those feelings too. And by remembering, you'll know how important it is to be tender with them and give them time, because recovering from a big loss, if one even can recover, takes a very long time. In fact, we're going to talk about that in just a second. So remember the mood here in the room right now. We, some say, live in a death-denying culture. We're getting better about it, and a lot of that is because of hospice and palliative care that now is more common than it certainly was when I was growing up. But we have developed another vocabulary, so we don't have to use this word, dead, because that's a pretty uncomfortable word for a lot of people. It's something from which one does not return. So what are some of those words that people use so they don't have to use the word dead?
Passing.
Pass. What else?
Sleeping.
They're sleeping, gone to sleep, gone here, gone there.
Bit the dust.
Bit the dust. That's one, isn't it? That's what they'd say. So expire, gone to the road, pass away, pass on, pass over, bought the farm, kicked the bucket, croak. And we use one or another of those terms depending on who died. So you wouldn't say that my dear mom kicked the bucket. You probably wouldn't say that. You might say she passed away. It might be that some crook or hoodlum kicked the bucket or bought the farm because of his or her misdeeds. So we
I never heard bought the farm.
bought the farm.
That's been around for a long time.
Yeah, that's an old one. And we could probably look up where they come from, but it's all terms that we use so we can keep that term dead, death, dying at arm's length. But when that's what we're talking about, I encourage you to use that word, dead, died, death, because everybody knows what you're talking about, dead. Most kids learn about death, most people learn about death when they were kids. We just heard about that when some of us were 4 or 5 years old when someone or something died. My kids could just look at my lawn and they'd say, "Oh, Dad, the grass is dead." So there are ways of relating to what's going on around you that even a little person catches on. The goldfish ups and dies, and if the parents want to teach a life lesson, they'll talk about the death of the goldfish as opposed to running out to PetSmart and just getting another goldfish that sort of looks like that one. Mr. Rogers has a great episode about the death of a goldfish, by the way, if you ever can catch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or search for that online. He handles it very, very well. And there's the goldfish. So it might be because of a person, a pet, or something that they see in nature. So it just happens. There are deaths that are either sudden or expected. The sudden deaths are probably because of a heart attack, stroke, car accident, that sort of thing, something that just strikes somebody down in their tracks. That's how it went for my mother. She was up getting ready for church. She sat down in a chair and died. And every one of her friends said, if only we could all die that way. Although I've said a time or two, I wouldn't have minded if she just suffered for a couple of hours so we could have said thank you and goodbye. But she just sat down and died. And if you get rewarded at the end of your life for living a magnificent life, maybe that's what she got that day. And then there are other kinds of deaths, the kind that, for example, Clark is now going to tend to with his mother-in-law who's dying with dementia, cancer, emphysema, pneumonia, the things that you can see coming. And in a sense, there's a blessing and a curse there. The blessing is that it gives you time to say things to one another that you might not otherwise say, but you realize that time is running out. So if you're going to say something, you better say it. The curse, obviously, is that sometimes there's a certain amount of misery connected with it, both for the person who's dying and for the people who love them. It's hard to watch someone die. And so if you have that time with a person, and if your care receiver should happen to be taking a slow slide into death, then you will have time to see them. And you might want to ramp up your visits a little bit and ask them what they need from you during that phase, because it might be different than when they were a little healthier. Most deaths seem unexpected, even when they are of a type such as you saw it coming, because expecting a death is done in our minds, but experiencing a death is done in our hearts. Yeah.
You know, you just mentioned maybe ramp up your visits as a person is dying, but, you know, in this article, they're talking about how towards the end, people that are dying kind of push others away and only want that one person there. So
have you ever seen that happen?
That doesn't know us really
so
well?
You have to decide if you're a part of the, or you have to have a feeling that you're a part of the inner circle and you would be welcome there. If
Well, I could see it being where you would ramp up your visits for a time, and then they would reach the point where they might just want that one other person. You know what I mean? There's probably a time in the middle where they might want
Or you
more.
could go and be with the family sometimes too.
you can also help the family. That's right. Because
The person may want just one person in the room, but the family is going through a whole different trauma in the waiting room maybe.
hard knowing. There's a woman who was one of my mother's classmates who died, it's probably about 5 years ago now. And when she was in her last hours, we were in Pennsylvania and on our way back, driving home, and the family called me, and this is a woman who changed my diapers, so we're pretty close. We've known each other my entire life. And I said, Janice, I think we should just drive straight through and just get there. So we did. And, you know, we got home, we dropped off the kids, we went down to she was in an inpatient hospice facility. And I got there and I said, I'm Marlis, I'm here. And the family then said, we're just going to take a little break. We're going to go out and have a cup of coffee. And I sat there with her, just she and I. All of a sudden she opened her eyes wide open, just like this, and her eyes had been closed, no sign that she was aware of anything around her. And I said, oh, Marlis, I know what you're doing, just wait. And I went out and got the family and brought them in, and within maybe 3-4 minutes she was dead.
Well, a lot of people want
So-
their family not to be in the room in the sense.
Hard, you know, and I've seen that happen too, where the family goes down for lunch and then that's when the patient dies. And I always tell people, this might happen. I know you're keeping a vigil and you really want to be here, but maybe as this last little kind act that your loved one does for you, they're going to spare you the pain of being there at that moment, even though you want to be. So it's hard to know how it's going to go. But if you're a part of the inner circle, if the family embraces you as one of them, and remember, it's not just you, it's the church. You know, you're there representing the church. And if they want you there, then it's good to just try and hang in there. There's going to be a slide about that in a moment. And there are rituals and liturgies that are oftentimes said at the time of death. I didn't put any of them in your notebook, but we can get you that stuff. The little glass vial in the communion kit is for oil. People sometimes want to be anointed at the time of death. And any kind of oil will do, honestly. Vegetable oil is fine. And there are anointing services. So that's something we can share with you, or you can find out from your pastor if that's done in your congregation. So expecting a death happens here. Experiencing a death happens here, even if you saw it coming. You can see the same levels of grief with survivors as if it had just hit them out of the blue. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a neat lady, physician, psychotherapist, wrote a book a long time ago called On Death and Dying. One of the earliest thanatological studies that has been done, and I still think one of the best. For practical purposes, although people will sometimes say there are more than the stages she identifies, and they can make a pretty good case for it. But for our purposes here, these stages are easy to remember. And as I tick through them, you may remember experiencing them yourself in your own times of loss. So the first one is denial. No, it can't be me. You've made a mistake in the lab. You've got my records confused with some other patient's records. Boy, when I've given bad news to people, so often the first words out of their mouth is, no, it can't be true. Denial. Then comes anger, and and I should say right here, and I'll say it again, not always in this order, but for purposes of the list, in this order. Anger. So that involves accepting that this bad thing is in fact happening, and doggone it, this is not the plan. This is not what I wanted to have happen in my life. Following anger, we often see bargaining. This is the let's make a deal phase of dealing with death. We make bargains with healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, others. Make deals with God. Make this cancer go away and I'll do anything. Ultimately, for many, and really I suppose for all of us, the bargains fail, which leads to depression. The realization that we will not recover from this illness and death is the likely outcome. Some people get a serious case of the blues at that point, and some will ask, why me? Others might say, why not me? But it's not uncommon for people to be a little bit sad that the expected outcome is going to be death. Finally, one hopes people can move towards acceptance and hope. They understand that this bad thing is happening, but instead of asking why, they ask, now what? What shall I do with the time I have left? This is a hope-filled phase, and we hope that we can help our care receivers move towards it. The left axis is grief. It might go from 0 to 100, and it peaks occasionally over time, which is the right axis. A bad thing happens, marked by the X on this slide, and then people often will react in predictable ways, crying, hysteria. Some, of course, keep it in or internalize their sadness, but for most, tears come. The grief is most intense at first, and then it always subsides. People do settle down. But then something will remind them of the loss. Might be a sight, a sound, the visit of someone new, having to share the bad news with someone else, and then there's another grief peak, on and on and on. Some talk about it as being like a walk through the mountains with peaks and valleys. Others say it's like a roller coaster ride. At any rate, the grief peak process goes out for a very long time. In fact, if it's been a death that causes great grief with you, it will probably last your entire life. So you just get used to having it around and can expect that grief peaks will occur from time to time. We'll look at a slide in a moment that predicts what some of those peaks might be. When have you experienced grief peaks as you think about the losses in your life? Holidays are common. The person that you love isn't there any longer. Their birthday, an anniversary. The anniversary of the death is very common. We'll talk about a way that we as caregivers might help families when death anniversaries roll around. A favorite song you hear on the radio, a photograph you see, a video playing of the one that you loved, visiting a favorite place, seeing something, hearing something familiar. We all have them. These are the triggers for a grief peak, and it's very normal. There are 3 ways that we as caregivers can be helpful: ritual, revelation, and relationship. We'll look at each in the next few slides. First, ritual. We in the church are pretty good at this. We have rituals for all sorts of things. I always put a picture of the Rock of Gibraltar here because it's the most solid rock I can think of. You lean up against a rock like that and it's not going to move. Even though you feel like falling over, it will help prop you up. The next slide we'll think about some of the rituals we use in the faith community. All of us who are a part of the faith community are familiar with the rituals that are offered there. We pray with people, we offer confession and absolution. Communion is brought to folks, just as we discussed earlier in today's session. We anoint with a little bit of oil put on the person's forehead, and we say, "You're marked with the cross of Christ, sealed by the Holy Spirit forever." We offer blessing services, often done if a newborn should die. We sing hymns, we read from the Bible. We help people plan their funerals. We might bring them a prayer shawl. All sorts of things that people of faith do for folks that are having a hard time. It helps them get through, and it's very solid, very reliable, and very comforting. Next, revelation. And by that I mean things that people might discover that are new. A great way I've found over the years to get at that is to ask people what they've learned now that this bad thing has happened to them. I remember working with a nurse in the hospital in Florida. I asked her that question after she had a lengthy hospital stay. She was quiet for a long time, but then came to me in a little while and said, "You know what I learned? I learned who gave a darn." That's important. That's an important revelation. Who knows what it will be? But almost always, a brush with death is a time of learning. Ask them about it. The third R, relationship. That might be with their family and friends, might be with God, it might be with you. We'll look at each in the next slides. The first relationship that's important to dying people is the relationship with their family and friends. Some families are awkward about this, so you might need to give them a little help and encouragement. You might even need to say, if you're going to talk to your father, you probably should do it sooner rather than later. Hopefully they'll get the message. Create a space for them where they can do this, and they will do it in their own way as best they can. Remember, you're a representative of the church. There is no reason why you ought not bring up the person's relationship with God. Don't be shy about asking about this. You might do as my Uncle Noel did. Every once in a while he'd ask me, "How are things going with you and the Lord?" As people approach the time of death, almost always they'll have an answer. They've been thinking about this, and they're wondering about what lies ahead. None of us really knows, not for sure, but you can talk about it. One of my seminary professors used to say that heaven will be better than the best thing you've ever known. I thought, won't that be something? Better than the birth of my children, better than when I married my wife, better than my best day ever. That's something you can help a person look forward to. Finally, there's the relationship with you. Remember this diagram from our prayer lecture where you bridge the gap that might exist between someone and God? Your bond with your care receiver can be strong. If you've known them for a long time, they might want you to be a part of their last days. So work with the family when it comes time for this. It's a special moment. It can be really very sweet. I encourage you to be brave enough to do it. We're going to watch a video now about one of my favorite teachers, Edith Bunker, as she visits a woman in a nursing home. This woman is near the time of death, and Edith struggles, trying so hard to do something for the woman. But in the end, Loretta lets her know what she wants. And honestly, it's really very simple.
Mrs. Bunker, I want you to stay with Mrs. Dillon.
She's back? She must be feeling better.
No, I'm afraid the hospital just couldn't do anything else for her.
Oh, but we mustn't give up hope. My Aunt Elizabeth from Elizabeth, New Jersey. That ain't the reason they called her Elizabeth. She was very sick.
Mrs. Bunker, is this going to take long?
Yeah.
You better tell me tomorrow.
Oh, all right, remind me. Maybe Mrs. Dillon would like me to read her a story.
Be sure it's a short one.
Is she that sick?
You better read fast.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we mustn't make jokes.
If I didn't joke, Miss Bunker, I'd cry.
Well, is there anything special you want me to do for her?
Give her whatever she asks for. Oh, but if you do need me, push the buzzer. Loretta, look who's here to see you.
Hi, Loretta.
Hello, Edith. How nice.
Welcome home. We missed you.
You know, I had another heart attack.
I know.
You know what those terrible people did?
No, what?
They kept me alive. Why don't they just let me go?
Where?
I lived a good life. Why can't the end be good, too?
Well, I guess it ain't up to us to decide them things.
God decides?
Yeah.
God decided. When I was in the hospital, God said, Loretta, it's time. And I saw my husband, Arthur, too. He waved at me and he said, come on, Loretta, I'm waiting for you.
Really?
He was a good husband, an unusual man. Never a harsh word between us.
That is unusual.
I should be with Arthur now. They shouldn't make me go through this. Edith, I can't even go to the bathroom by myself.
Don't worry about it. Ain't there something I can get you? A glass of water? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please, sit down. It's nice to have company. Nobody comes to see me anymore, not even my daughter. Noreen is afraid of sickness. She's always been like that.
But you know that she loves you.
And I love her. She's not strong. She never has been.
My Aunt Ethel was like that. She wouldn't even boil a cabbage because she said when she dropped it in the pot, she could hear it scream. I know what we could do. We can fix you up, and then we can call Noreen and tell her you're feeling better and tell her to come and see you.
Maybe tomorrow. Now I want to rest. Will you stay with me if I go to sleep?
Oh, sure. Can I get you another blanket?
No, just sit here.
Ain't there something I can do for you?
Just hold my hand. And don't let go.
I hope when my time comes, when your time comes, there's someone like Edith. And for your care receivers, maybe it'll be you. So stay open to it. It really is a big honor to be with somebody as they journey towards death, and if it's possible, even to be there when their time comes to die. As Edith said, just hold my hand and don't let go. That's my mom's friend Marlis, the day she died, with her husband Vic, who I got from the break room at hospice. I said, "You need to come now." So he was there. Oh, things to do after a death. Attend the funeral. Showing up is really important. If the family doesn't know you, then introduce yourself as the caregiver for the person who died. Participate in the funeral if you can. You might do a reading. You might be part of the liturgy. Ask the pastor if you can do that, and probably they'll let you if the dais isn't all filled up already with family members and others. But or you could be an usher. It might be something, anything that you can do. Do a welfare check with the family. My suggestion would be a month after the death, 6 months after the death, certainly a year after the death, maybe subsequent years on the death date, and the care receiver's birthday, the first Christmas after the death, other times that you can just think of because of your knowledge of these people. I put those reminders in my cell phone with a note to, if I'm going to send a little card, then it's a couple, 3 days ahead. If it's an email, which is what it usually is for me, then I just remind myself a day ahead and say, I'm going to be thinking about you tomorrow. I know tomorrow's the day. And oh my goodness, people love that. That you remember. Remember, that was one of the 7 keys to listening. Remember. Remember what you've experienced with these people. So, do you have questions about working with your care receivers at the time of death? We good? Did we cover most of the bases?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Then here's the thing. We're almost done. If you had any questions that you wanted to ask about our time together, anywhere along the way, this is the moment. You can always get back in touch with me later. But seeing no hands, I'll press the last couple of keys. This has to do with your homework. So the first one is the final exam. I'm going to hand that out to you now. There you go. Yes, there is a test. The good news, it's an open book take-home test. So if you've been paying attention, I don't think you're going to have trouble getting these answers. The first section are multiple choice for the most part. The last few are essay questions, which may or may not come from material that you learned here in our class, but it calls for your thoughts about some things. You can mail that to me here at church. You can drop it off. If you're here, you can just drop it off on some Sunday. You can scan it if you know how to do that, or ask a kid, because kids will know how to scan, and email it. Somehow it ends up here with me. For those of you from other churches, I will review that material, make written comments, and then forward it on back to your pastor.
Could you give us your correct, or
It's
it's marked
at the
that?
There it is,
Okay.
right down at the bottom.
All right. It is on the form, so I'm gonna-
Finish that disclosure document, get it to the proper person within your congregation. Then schedule an interview with, in the case of this church, me, the care team coordinator, or perhaps the pastor in your church. Other congregations should touch base with your pastor. So once you've got all your materials in, and I'm going to tell you what those are in just a second, then give me a few days to take a look at them, and then we're going to schedule interviews. For the Hennepin people, I will email you some days and times. Hopefully we'll come up with a time. It will be me and one other care team member that will be visiting with you. In your church, it will probably just be you and the pastor if this is a new program. And then email me if you have questions, or that's the email address. So what it says on my business card is just mark@HAUMC, so you have to insert a mark.peterson@haumc.org. Got it? Okay. Your student folder is going to contain your application, your shadowing reports, your visitors, the veteran reports, and your final exam. If you did more than one shadowing experience, there should be more than one form. If you went with the same pastor, they might just turn in one report to you, but that's up to them. And then the disclosure document, as I mentioned, goes to the right person at your church. So remember, here's some parting words from me to you. The gift you bring is your presence, and you really do have power. Dunamis is the Greek word for that, power. You have power to bless your care receivers just as they are. Let them know that they are okay just as they are, and that you're so thankful to be in their lives. And I'm pretty sure they're going to be thankful that you are in theirs. You bring your gift of your presence. So let those people be your teachers. All we've done here is to help you get ready to knock on the first door. From here on, those people will teach you everything you need to know about visiting, and that learning will go on, I think, for a long time to come. That's it. Go in peace, serve the Lord. The end. Ta-da!
Thank you very much.